is so good to be back with you again for another day of Bible study as we continue on our conversation through brave conversations. This week, we're focusing on the topic of domestic violence, and we find ourselves in a very interesting chapter for this topic, Genesis chapter 19. But before we get there, I want to encourage you to find out more about who we are, Christ Table. You can go online to this website, www.christtable.today. Would encourage you to check us out there. And if you have not already done so, feel free to sign up for our email list there so that you will know everything that's happening around Christ Table. But whether or not you're a part of Christ Table, we still encourage you to feel free to be a part of our Bible studies. You can download the entire reading plan, all of the topics that we're walking through in these brave conversations at go.christtable.today/brave. Now, one very important thing that I want to invite you to, it's happening tonight. We are joining together as a group to talk through this book, Brave Church. This is actually the foundation of this Bible study. It's a book by, right there, Elizabeth Hagen. You can get this through Amazon. Obviously, won't be here by tonight, but you can also download it on any of your e-reading devices, Kindle, iPad, whatever you may have. And we are in chapter 4 tonight, which is the chapter that has to do with domestic violence. Even if you haven't read the book yet, but you want to come and just be a part of dialogue or just show up and listen, we would love to have you. 8 o'clock Eastern time. All you have to do is go to this link, go.christtable.today/discuss, and we will be there having a conversation tonight about these Bible passages and also just domestic violence in particular. And one more thing before we jump into the study, I want to encourage you to take advantage of our resource box that's coming out here in just a couple of weeks for December and January. We're calling it our Christmas resource box. It's going to have our next Bible study in there. There will be a book, and this, I'm super excited about the book that's in there that we're sending to you in this Christmas resource box. We have a gift that we're sending in there. We're going to have something for the kids in there. It is it's great. You can't buy it, and the only way that you're able to get it is we send it just absolutely free to anybody who's a regular donor to Christ Table. And so if you'd like to receive this and be a part of what we're doing here at Christ Table, it's as simple as becoming a regular donor, and you can take care of all of that right there at www.christtable.today, and we would love to have you on board, and you won't be disappointed in this. I promise it's going to be a great one. Well, let's dig in. As we have talked over the last few days, we have found out some very important but also disturbing things about domestic violence. And I want to begin by just refreshing our memory just a little bit that 1 in 3 women suffer at some point in their life with a domestic abuse or domestic violence situation at the hand of a partner with whom they're intimate. But we also have pointed out that domestic abuse or domestic violence can also happen to people from those who are not an intimate partner of theirs. And even men can be the victim, can be the abused in a domestic violence situation. But one thing that is clear, especially from this statistic, is that it is pervasive, it's prevalent, and it is something that affects a lot of individuals. So what is domestic violence and abuse? Well, we need to know that it knows no boundaries. It doesn't care about gender. It can happen to male or female. It doesn't matter what race you are, people of color, white. It doesn't matter what your socioeconomic class is, where you are located, or even your social status. And one of the things, too, that we have come to understand and need to be aware of is that domestic violence, domestic abuse, can be committed by family or close friends. In fact, that is most often times the perpetrator of abuse and violence is those who are closest to us. And that violence and abuse often occurs in places that are considered by the victims to be safe space. And so we must always be on our guard for ourselves and for each other. Domestic abuse within a dating, cohabitating, or marriage relationship is a pattern of one partner using or abusing power or control over the other. And it can take many different forms. We think of abuse or violence as being physical, but it doesn't have to always be physical for it to be domestic violence or domestic abuse. It can be emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, spiritual, or even cyber digital social media abuse. When we come to today's passage, Genesis chapter 19, and I hope that you'll read the entirety of it. One of the things that I want to encourage you to do is, even if you watch or listen to this, I hope that you will have your Bible out with you as we're going through it, or that you have already read it before you come to the Bible study, or that you'll read the passage on your own afterwards, because I can only do so much here. And there's just something about you and the synergy that comes whenever you're invested yourself in the biblical text. Don't rely just on me. But when we come to Genesis chapter 19, we are coming now right after the events of Sodom and Gomorrah in chapters 18 and 19 of the book of Genesis, where Lot and his daughters have been living in Sodom. The angels come in to say that there's going to be destruction of the city. Lot and his daughters are the only ones, and his wife, who leave, but his wife turns back, and the text tells us is turned to a pillar of salt for the disobedience there, which is another whole Bible study for another whole time. It's not the point for today. I so wish we could get into that, but I don't have the time, so we'll just have to put a pin in that one and come back to it, because we're going to catch up to the story right after that event. As they have left Sodom, they know that the cities of the plains have been destroyed, and we come into now this home where now the wife is gone, and it's just Lot and his two daughters. Afterward, verse 30 tells us, Lot left Zoar because he was afraid of the people there, and he went to live in a cave in the mountains with his two daughters. One day the older daughter said to her sister, "There are no men left anywhere in this entire area, so we can't get married like everyone else, and our father will soon be too old to have children." So, coming on the heels of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the area, really this passage is kind of leading us to believe that Lot's daughters believe that there are no men left on the face of the planet, that perhaps even everything has been destroyed, and that they are the only ones who are left. They're living in a cave, they're outside the cities, there are no wonders coming and going, no Bedouins, and so they are in this situation where either they believe that their father's getting too old, no women are going to come, he's not going to be able to remarry and have children, produce a son, or they believe that they are the only people left maybe on the planet, if not just in the area. And so this provides them a great deal of concern for continuing on the family line from Lot, which is a big deal back then, especially in a patriarchal society. So they hatch this plan. Come, let's get our father, let's get him drunk with wine, and then we will have sex with him. That way we will preserve our family line through our father. Incest. Incest, though, which is instigated by the daughters. So as we've talked about domestic violence and domestic abuse, we have to keep in mind that oftentimes the stereotypical patterns and people and who the victim is, who the perpetrator is in domestic abuse situations is not always stereotypical, which is exactly what we see here. Now, when they write here in the Hebrew, get our father drunk, this isn't just drinking wine. The word that's actually used here is a very specific word in the Hebrew that means to irrigate. So essentially what's being communicated here is they are going to saturate their father with alcohol to the point of total and complete inebriation. So that night, they get him drunk with wine, they saturate him, they irrigate him with wine, and the older daughter goes in and has intercourse with her father. He was unaware of her lying down or her getting up again. The next morning, the older daughter says to her younger sister, "I had sex with our father last night. Let's get him drunk with wine again tonight, and if you go in and have sex with him, then that way we will preserve our family line through our father." So that night, they get him drunk with wine, irrigate him, saturate him with wine again, and the younger daughter goes in and has intercourse with him. And as before, he was unaware of her lying down or of her getting up again. And as a result, both of Lot's daughters become pregnant by their own father. I have a lot of problems with this passage. First of all, it's vile. Second of all, it's also sanitized. It doesn't give any moral or ethical or spiritual commentary on the rightness or more specifically the wrongness of what's going on here. It's just kind of completely sanitized. It's just telling it as though it's telling it to us in a medical textbook without any emotion whatsoever, which is disturbing to me because this is a disturbing event. I can't reconcile or explain the sanitized way in which it is given. I also can't spiritually explain away what the daughters did. The timing of this event happens in a time where we are well aware from other historical and ancient literature from this time that this would have been seen as being wrong. This would have not been okay, even to further on a family line, whether it be through the God of Israel or through the Code of Hammurabi. This would have not been okay. In fact, this kind of thing would have essentially meant the stoning of the guilty party here. So we know that in the time period, this is not okay. And these girls should have known that this was not okay either. And most of the commentaries that I've read on this point out the fact that this is a situation where the daughters essentially do something that is absolutely wrong and lays 100% of the blame on the daughters. And you see that play itself out in most of the sermons, which I'm trying to think. I don't know that I've ever heard a sermon on this, but if you find a few online, it's the daughters who are to blame here. And certainly in the commentaries that I read, it was the daughters who are to blame here. It wasn't until actually I went to Jewish literature, and even the Jewish literature oftentimes has blamed the daughters here and said nothing about Lot. But some of the midrash, some of the writings, some of the ancient rabbis who have looked at this text have pointed out some things that I think is important for us to pay attention to, and maybe part of the unease that we feel as well with this passage. And the first one is that there is already something off in Lot's family when it comes to sexual ethics. So all we have to do is just back up a few verses into the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is just before, where Lot essentially, and Sodom and Gomorrah isn't a story about homosexuality. Go back and reread the story again. Homosexuality is not condemned. Homosexuality isn't even mentioned here. He's offering his daughters to men for gang rape. It just, the men weren't, anyway. It's a whole other story. But the fact that he offers his daughters to strangers of the city, the people who are there, in order to satisfy them is, it's messed up. And so we already see that there is some sort of dysfunction, likely even a sexual nature of a dysfunction going on in Lot's family. So when we fast forward now to Genesis chapter 19, verses 30 to 38, where Lot's daughters are now suggesting things that are dysfunctional sexually in a family setting, even though it feels as though they're only doing it because the ends justify the means, it's not really a biblical thing to say that the ends justify the means. God could have provided a way, and maybe perhaps would have provided a different way for their families. But we already see that that is off here, that there is an example from the father, from Lot, of sexual dysfunction. The other thing that I think that we have to point out here is that the text says, and maybe I can bring this back up again, see if I can find the right verse here. Let him get drunk with wine again tonight, go in and have sex with him, with his father. Yeah, the previous verse here, verse 33, down at the bottom. He was unaware of her lying down and of her getting up again. Now, several of the Jewish rabbis in the Midrash have pointed out that when it comes to that getting up again part of the line, if you look at actually the original scrolls, at least the latest scrolls that we have, or the, I guess the earliest, as it were, scrolls and evidence that we have on that. There's actually a dot above the word there that indicates actually the opposite of unawareness in the getting up again. And so the point of that is that there is a minor but very critical note in the text at this point from the ancient scribes that indicates to us that the thought is actually the opposite in the second half of the sentence, that he was unaware of his oldest daughter lying down, but that he was aware of her getting up. Now, if that be true, which I think that it is as possible, if not more possible, of being true, as he was unaware both times. If that be true, then he would at least be aware that he had had sex with his daughter, that something had gone on, which means that whenever the second time rolls around, the next night where the younger daughter comes in and does essentially the same thing, his radar should have been up. And so he may not have been complicit in the first event with the older daughter, but because he was, the text seems to indicate, aware of her getting up, the older daughter, and leaving, then with the younger daughter, he would have been complicit because he would have known. And so there are a number of ancient rabbis who take this direction with the text and say, Lot, you have some fault, if not being completely at fault here in this situation. And I'm going to take that one step further and say, I still think, no matter where you come down on that Lot is still at fault here because of the presence of alcohol. Now, I was raised fundamentalist, and this type of passage was the reason why my fundamentalist brethren of my youth are teetotalers, is because once you start, you can't stop. Is the mentality. There's no self-control that's available. So don't do it at all. Now, for some people, yes, but everything in life is that way. We all have our vices. Anyway, here though, with Lot, Lot is a willing participant at the least in the consumption of alcohol. Lot allows himself to get to the point of being so completely hammered that he is unable to recognize whenever his own daughter comes in order to have sex with him, and then potentially even leaves, and for it to happen 2 nights in a row. There is a level of dysfunction within Lot there where he allows himself to become so lost in inebriation that he is unable to control himself. So at that very level, were the daughters to blame? Yes. Was Lot to blame? Yes. And I think that this is where we have some room to really take stock of what happens in domestic abuse and domestic violence situations today, in that, is there perhaps a share of blame to go around in multiple places for the breakdown in relationships and the outcomes? Potentially, yes, in some situations. But we have to be careful in where we lay blame. And I think historically the full blame has been laid at the feet of the women in this story, at the daughters in the story, Lot's daughters. And while clearly I think that there is blame to be held there, Lot could have prevented this from happening. And so where was the abuse? That's a tough one. And sometimes it is in real life too. Where is the abuse? Was it the daughters abusing Lot? Seems as though that's the case. Did Lot abuse the daughters? Yeah, I think so. I think there is a history of Lot abusing his daughters. In what way and to what extent? I can't say. But I can say that what happened in Sodom wasn't okay. And it's a bellwether, it's a flag that says that there is dysfunction in Lot, and there is likely dysfunction in the family as well of a sexual nature. The extent of that abuse, the extent of that violence, whether it's small, minimal, or large, significant, we will never know. But I think that any reasonably thinking person can look at the outcomes right here in Genesis 19, verses 30 through 38, and say, these are eventual outcomes that horrifically could have been expected given the circumstances between Lot and his family. And so I think it is important for us to continue to state that we must be well aware of dysfunction, lest we become perpetrators or lest we allow those around us to become perpetrators of violence. What are the traits of an abuser? Well, we continue to put this up because it's important for us to know. Low self-esteem. This seemed to be something that characterized Lot. A belief in male superiority. Well, that in those days described just about everyone. A tendency to blame others. Pathological jealousy. We're seeing a lot of Lot in these. Possessive of their partner's time. A dual personality. Severe stress reactions. The frequent use of sex as an aggressive act and a refusal to believe that actions may have negative consequences. Now, every perpetrator of domestic violence and domestic abuse isn't going to have all of these, usually, but they will likely have one or more of these. And people who have one or more of these may not be or ever be an abuser. But these are signs, these are hints that need to be paid attention to. Now, before we close, I want to say one more thing. I want to say that it is important for us to make sure that if you are struggling with domestic violence or abuse, if you are an abused person, either in your past or in your present, that you get help, that you reach out. You reach out to someone who's safe, whether that's me, whether that's somebody else. It is always privileged, confidential conversations whenever you have them with me, that you reach out to a therapist, that you reach out to the police, a counselor, a trusted friend, somebody. Please don't suffer in silence. You are too valuable. You are too important. You are too loved by God and by those around you to continue to endure what you have endured. Until tomorrow, happy